this to Bernard Cribbins.
What?
Go on, mate.
What a bloody cheek, honestly. This is absolutely wonderful, and I know how pleased he must be, because he's been at it for 4 years. And I think everybody who gets involved with Doctor Who will be just as pleased as he is. And I know that he would want to pay tribute to the team down in Wales, from Julie and Russell at the top, right down to the runners, Tom and Blood, wherever she is tonight. The whole team down there are certainly the best I think I've ever worked with in British television. Ever, ever, ever. They're wonderful. And for the viewers who voted for this, thank you. BBC Cymru am beth.
Time for Type 40, a Doctor Who podcast from the Spacebook for the Fandom Podcast Network. I'm Dan Hadley, Birmingham's King of the Geeks, and this is the latest episode of our show where we not only review and preview the Time Lord's adventures in whatever media, but travel and track the decades of real-world history with its comings and, in this case, its goings. And it's a very sad occasion bringing us together. This time, the loss of a wonderful performer and invaluable screen and stage presence in the lives of generations of British viewers. His work on Doctor Who in particular has been enjoyed by those the whole world over. And it was announced on Thursday, the 28th of July, a few days just before the recording of this, that Bernard Cribbins OBE passed away at the age of 93. Bernard was a performer for over 70 of those years in movies, TV, and theatre. He seemingly worked with everybody during that time. For us, it was for so long primarily as the co-star of the second of the Doctor Who and the Daleks movies that he was in alongside Peter Cushing. That was what we knew him for. But decades later, of course, he came back to the show proper as the much-loved character Wilfred Mott between 2007 and 2010. Bernard is well known for having thrown himself into absolutely every job that he ever took, and you never knew really where he was going to show up next. And with a return to our favourite show coming for its 60th anniversary and masses of memories to share here, well, this edition of Type 40 is our humble, loving tribute, salute, celebration of Bernard Cribbins, for you, for us, and for him. Okay, with me on this show are my regular companions here. We've got Simon Horton, Charlotte Shields, and Ian Diaz, all here to pay tribute to the legend that is Bernard Cribbins. We've had a few days to take this all in now, everybody. It does feel like the loss of family. You know, you hear these phrases trotted out, don't you? A legend, a national treasure, irreplaceable. They're only cliches because they're true, aren't they, Simon?
Well, do you know what I think is really interesting as we start to talk about Bernard, and just with your introduction there, the one thing that I'm left with, the one question I'm left with, is there anybody out there at all that doesn't love Bernard Cribbins? He's one of those people who is not divisive. He's not Marmite. He's not you either love him or loathe him. I genuinely am intrigued. I can't imagine there is a soul in the United Kingdom that doesn't love Bernard Cribbins, because what is not to love about him? I genuinely think there's nobody out there that doesn't love him. Nobody.
I would agree. Lots of entertainment figures are Marmite, and they can be people from current times, from reality TV, people in their teens and early 20s, or even much older people who've been around forever. You know, I know people who don't like Cliff Richard, which I find extraordinary, but it's true. Simon's right, isn't he, Charlotte?
Yeah, and I think it's Cribbins just had this energy, and that's also a phrase you hear a lot. Sort of somebody's got this special energy, or there's something about them. But with Bernard, it was just he reached out, and whether you just heard his voice or you saw him on screen, you just instantly connected. And I think also it didn't matter what age, because I first saw him in Doctor Who in that special when it was just a cameo. And instantly I remember just feeling like, oh God, what a lovely character. And it's just, doesn't matter what age, that's another thing I think's unique, that whatever age you do get that connection with Bernard.
Ian, we often hear when we talk about character actors on this show alone, but you often hear it said, don't you, that actors from that era have this kind of twinkling quality. It was said about William Hartnell, you know, in the Adventures in Space and Time docudrama. But Bernard Cribbins really was part of that generation, wasn't he? It had that star quality.
Yeah, he was. But I hate to say it, the thing I remember him for most is the Wombles.
Me too.
It's not Doctor Who, it's the Wombles, because when I was growing up,
we'll be touching on it all, I promise, as the show goes ahead, because there isn't a great deal that Bernard hasn't done on the stage, on the small screen, and he's been in considerable successes on the big screen too, Ian.
He's working. Look, in the old days, right? Actors weren't after fame; they went after being on Instagram and talking load of crap. Basically, they were just wanted to work, and Bernard was one of those. He came from that generation. Him, you know. All the actors you can mention, I mean, Roy Castle, all of them, they just wanted to work. That's why Bernard and Roy Castle and the people that came from that generation, they did everything. He did Jackanory, he did dramas, he did movies, he did TV, he did a comedy sketch, had his own show as a comedy thing. So all he wanted to do was work and perform. That was his sole purpose on this planet. But today it's very different. And, you know, I salute him because he did a really great job with anything that he did, whether it was reading the story from Jackanory or putting a voice to Orinoco in bloody, Wombles. He was fantastic. He was great at what he did. And how could you not like someone like that? You can't. Every time you see him, you kind of gravitate towards him. Even when he was in Doctor Who, you gravitate towards him because what you get from him is it's not pretend. It's purely him, if you know what I mean, to a certain degree, of course. But yeah, it's purely him. And that's why.
It's authentic. And Simon, it seems to me, you know, Ian's right there. It's one thing saying, oh, you know, actors, performers, they're not going to turn down work. But Bernard Cribbins seemed absolutely fearless, didn't he, in the things that he would take on?
We talk about this a lot on the live shows when we're looking back into the past, and we talk about some of the heavyweight actors from the classic series. We talk about a lot about these character actors who are literally a dying breed, and I really mourn the passing of it, because yes, Ian is absolutely spot on. This breed of actor, of which Bernard quite rightly was one of them, yeah, they were real heavyweights. They were workaholics. They just worked and worked and worked. And Ian's spot on. They didn't do it for the fame. They did it for the work and the love of working, and they just bring such a quality to any production. Again, we've talked about this a lot about gravitas, and Bernard Cribbins brings gravitas in spades. Charlotte, the fact that you sort of pick up on just a brief cameo in one episode, you immediately click into that. Well, there's got to be some reason why that is, and it's the gravitas. It's the fact that they bring this weight with them that immediately makes you pay attention. Whereas a lot of, I am very, very openly critical of a lot of modern current day actors, because it's very, very lightweight. They don't know how to play a character part. They don't often know how to literally speak lines to get them out so that they can be understood. It's a very, very different mentality of acting. And Bernard was one of the old school of actors. Simple as that.
I'll tell you one thing though, seriously. Do you remember when Jackanory first started? And I know somebody that worked at the BBC not round about that time, but I know people that would talk to me about Jackanory, and they were saying it was really hard to get actors to read the story for kids. You know, they were begging people to read and stuff like that. Bernard Cribbins, he just did it. And then when Jackanory became famous, I remember a couple of years ago, I think it was like 5 or 7 years ago, they brought Jackanory back to celebrate Jackanory, and all these big stars were lining up to read the story from Jackanory, which kind of, when you think about it, it's kind of like, it's ridiculous, isn't it, when you think about it? Because really, as I said, Bernard Cribbins, he just did it because he loves performing, whether it be reading from a book or whether it be performing physically. But the actors that came in at the end, when we were celebrating Jackanory, they wanted to be there because it's Jackanory.
Yeah.
But, you see the difference between them both, and it's.
But you wonder, don't you, Ian? You wonder in that. I mean, I don't actually know. Maybe you know this, Dan. Did Bernard Cribbins ever do Shakespeare? Because he should have done, and he would have done it as brilliantly as he did Jackanory.
I believe he did. He did a lot of musical theatre. I'm not so sure about Shakespeare.
He could have done Shakespeare.
Researching this show, the list of credits for this man is absolutely extraordinary. Far, far greater and more diverse than I was certainly aware. And the list of people that he worked with is just, it's absolutely everybody. And sure enough, we hear that he worked with actors like David Niven. You see him in everything from little 5-minute shows on CBeebies, which he made well into his 80s, to really quite big movies. I don't think there's anybody in Great Britain who's never seen The Railway Children, for example. Yeah, that's a big film. There's a sequel just out now, a legacy sort of sequel to this film. And his character of Perks in that is absolutely integral to the entire story, to the appeal of it all. And I think that he kind of disappears into some of these parts, and that I wouldn't say we necessarily took him for granted, but he was so convincing that you kind of forget that it was him. Oh yes, and that was him. Oh, and this was him, and he was the voice of this.
What you're saying, Dan, there is that's exactly what we're talking about. That's a character actor. They disappear into their character. That's why they're so good at it, because you forget who it is that's playing it. And so often nowadays you will see a big film with a famous star in it, and they don't disappear into the character. You're constantly aware that you are watching whichever actor this is. Whereas, and it also touches on what Ian was saying, that's because, again, he wasn't bothered about any fame or anything like that. He was just doing the part because it was good. So there's no showing off. There was no showmanship there.
No.
He was doing the part.
Yeah, you're absolutely right.
Yeah, I think another part of that is how he could be a brilliant comedian in one part, and he could make you laugh, and then he could do a heartbreaking scene. And that's what I felt. I think that's why Wilf worked so well for me, because I saw him just have that spectrum that, like I said, when he first got introduced, it was more of a here's a funny sort of one-off character. And then as soon as he got more work in the series, when he came back, some of his scenes, especially in the specials with Tennant, I think it just shows his weight. And like the whole scene I love is when Tennant's doctor is talking about regeneration to Wilf. And he's basically saying, I don't want to die, I'm scared. And Wilf just carries that scene with Tennant, and you can see that Wilf is listening and is understanding and is trying to lend that ear. But
Yeah.
like
That's because he's a good actor.
Yeah.
But 5-10 minutes ago, like Dan just said, he had that picture of him with a funny hat on, and you were laughing, and that
with the
was
antlers. That's the silhouette of Wilf that we remember, with his woolly hat on, with the paratroopers pin badge on there, which I understand was one of his own personal touches that he would add. He would completely invest himself in these characters, and I think he would often, if not ad lib lines of the script, I think this is something that he always did, but he would certainly suggest things to writers and directors. And if they went with it, they went with it. If they didn't, they didn't. I don't think he was precious in the way that we hear that Tom Baker got to be about such things, but he was functional, I think, and constantly creative, thinking of what he could do. But I also get the impression that it wasn't just the case that he wanted to dial up whatever he was doing at the expense of other actors and the production. It seemed to be a more holistic way of thinking what could be the best thing for the entire piece. And I think he'd always been like that. When you think back to that second Dalek film, where he was largely, he was filling the role that had been vacated by Roy Castle. He was kind of the younger male lead who could move that bit quicker than Peter Cushing could. But in that, he brings a lot of strength, and he sort of anchors the whole thing really as an identifying figure, and yet he does a lot of sort of goofing around, doesn't he? I mean, the scene
he got beaten up in the beginning. It was really violent when he got beaten up. He got beaten in the beginning. I was like, what?
Got a proper whack. He got a proper whack, didn't he? Yeah, he did. Yeah. I get the impression that he would take that, and he would probably suggest it would be great if you gave me a proper cosh at that moment. I think he'd be down for pretty much whatever. I mean, I was surprised as well, just in the last few days since Bernard passed away, how little I knew about his life. I think I'd always assumed that a man like him, who was so avuncular, so playful, so much the nation's granddad, that he'd probably got quite a large family. And it turns out that he was very happily married for 66 years to Jill. They had no children. They had led quite simple life together. She passed away last year, and obviously Bernard was heartbroken. And for all that you could say, oh, they had no children, they had no this, they had no that, they clearly had a very fulfilled life together, supporting one another. And I think that's all you can really want for anybody, isn't it? He seemed like a very, very happy and contented man. And the fact that he was able to work until well into his 80s, Ian. I mean, you could say that, we never know which hand we're going to get dealt, do we, as regards our own personal health.
But that normally happens.
He maintained that sort of childlike quality. I think that probably is part of
it.
Yeah,
but that normally happens, though. I've noticed that about a lot of the generation before me. And when you've got a couple that's been married for years and years, and one of them goes, it's not long before the other goes. Do you know what I mean? So it's kind of,
It could well be that, yes, that was the point that he kind of lost the drive, certainly. But again, what you're saying there, Dan, that you didn't know until recently, until this week, quite the background story. That again says it all. That's because he wasn't a social media star. He was just a damned good actor. He was a professional. You didn't need to know his private life, and it wasn't necessarily because he was deliberately being private or secretive or reclusive or anything. It's just he didn't court the media in the way that people nowadays, as Ian said, do.
I think where it surprised me was that I felt, because he'd been around for so long, Charlotte, I felt that I knew him, and it turns out I didn't, because he was so good at his job at disappearing into those characters. He made me feel not just that I knew him, but I knew all of them too. They were all facets of him,
I think some of that's because whenever he did do, like you had that clip at the awards ceremony, whenever he did sort of go out in public, he was so funny and full of charisma and sort of down to earth, and you got a lot, like I said, he didn't court the media, but you almost got a lot of him when he did go to things that you just instantly, it just added more to the character that you already had in your head, I think.
He seemed so humble, didn't he?
And that's the thing. He's like I said. I was sort of talking to some of my Doctor Who friends because I got quite emotional on Thursday.
You got friends?
And basically, you know,
isn't he an horrible?
I'm joking.
I know. No, and we all sort of said the same thing. And we all sort of said we felt like he was just going to be here forever. Like, and it's such an odd feeling to say because obviously that's never going to happen. But you just felt like his presence or him was just going to stay.
Yeah, it is funny because we've all been very, very aware of his age for the past few years. You know, I've constantly almost been sort of waiting for the news to come in because we knew, as you say, Charlie, he was going to come in at some point. But a little bit like David Bowie, I think he was one of those kind of people that you did kind of feel, well, he's been around forever, so of course he's going to outlive me. He's going to be around forever. You got so used to he's so part of everybody's life that it wasn't, like you say, Dan, it's not necessarily that you're taking them for granted so much as they are literally part of the furniture, and however much you know they're not going to be around forever, you just kind of take it for granted. Well, of course they will be. I know they're not going to be around forever, but they will actually be around forever because we just got so used to him being there and seeing those performances.
I don't know. I just, you know, everybody keeps saying that he has charisma and all that stuff. Yeah, he did have charisma, right? But the best thing about him and actors of his ilk is like, I did not know anything about his private life, and that's where it should stop. Yeah. It really should. Today, I was watching something on, Instagram, and there's Will Smith saying that it wasn't his wife that made him slap so-and-so and all that rubbish. Do I need to know that? No. All I want to see him is perform in a movie, go and eat my popcorn and get out. I don't want to know anything about anyone's life.
We know about his wife, his kids, all their dirty laundry. Yeah, and I completely agree. He belongs, I think Bernard Cribbins belongs to the same school that John Pertwee did. I think it's no coincidence that they were occasional playmates, even though Bernard was a little younger than John Pertwee was. Pertwee was also quite fearless and lived under, Pertwee used to describe it, didn't he, Simon, as being under a green umbrella all his career. So he would never play himself. Ironically, until he took the role of the Doctor. That was when that was the nearest to John Pertwee that John Pertwee ever was on screen. And I wonder what was the closest we ever got to seeing the real Bernard Cribbins on screen now. I'm starting to wonder that.
We don't want to, do we? I mean, look at that scene where he's talking to David Tennant, and he was talking about the master, and he takes his gun out and he says, well, you know, end it before it gets worse. You know what I mean? If he's going to come and kill you, you might as well kill him. And obviously the Doctor's saying, no, I don't use a gun, blah, 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 whatever. But that performance in itself, right, is absolutely fantastic because the guy can act. The amount of people I've seen in Doctor Who that just can't act, and I just go like this all the time. And he was in it for what? How long? If you count all the minutes that Bernard Cribbins was in Doctor Who, it would probably equal an hour. No, actually, no, that's not true. Probably 2 hours. Probably 2 hours. Yeah, a couple of hours. But he's a brilliant actor. The bit where he was talking about, you know, he was in the war, just came out of nowhere. And when he started talking about when he was in the war, you believe what he was saying. That's what I'm saying. It's because he's a good actor. That's why we feel sorry that he's gone, in my opinion, of course.
Yeah, and it's also amazing, just to add to that, is I think we've all forgotten that Wilf wasn't originally part of Russell's plans for series 4.
No, it wasn't. But we know why he was. That's because he was part of Doctor Who, the unofficial part.
No, but the point is that originally it was going to be Donna's dad. He was going to be like that supportive role.
That's right. I'd forgotten that.
He'd been in The Runaway Bride, hadn't he? An actor. Howard Atfield, wasn't it, played Donna's father in that?
I can't remember, but he tragically passed. And
then
Russell obviously saw the reaction Wilf got in the Christmas special. And obviously knew, like we said, he was a class act, he was a name, he could trust him. And then we got Wilf. So that's also been going around my head a bit, just that in another universe, we could have not even had what we got in Series 4 and the specials. Wow. And I think that's the testament that even when he wasn't part of the original plans, he could just come in and, like Ian was saying, not get the amount of scenes that like maybe a main companion would get, or some of the more higher bill, but he could just come in and impress and leave the impression he has.
And that's because, again, he was a jobbing actor. He just got on and he did the work. That's what actors did. So he was never going to get precious about, I haven't got enough scenes or I haven't got enough lines. No, I'll turn up, I'll do the part, I'll read the lines, and I'll go again. And I think in many ways, to answer your question, Dan, I wonder whether Wilfred Mott maybe was the closest perhaps we ever got to Bernard Cribbins. I like to think that a character as lovely as Wilfred Mott was pretty close to Bernard in real life. I think there's a good possibility there.
Another thing that really hit home watching the last couple of episodes, well, it was 2, wasn't it, of David Tennant's tenure, was the fact that because of what Wilf said, it brought home that the Doctor cannot really be connected to people because for him, Wilf died, thousands and millions of years ago or hundreds of years ago.
There's a detachment
for him, it's a detachment. But he couldn't help gravitating towards Wilf because of the stuff that he was saying. And that's pure Doctor Who, in my opinion, that performance and that discussion and the Doctor with a human being that's of age is what, in my opinion, what Doctor Who is all about. It's not about plastic.
I can't imagine the David Tennant era. I can't imagine the David Tennant era without Bernard Cribbins as Wilfred Mott. That which he brought to the show, just as much as the full-time companions that we know from that entire era, from Martha, from Donna, from Rose, and everybody else. And we've got a lot of memories to go back on from his time, not just in Doctor Who, but in those other shows too, as we move through our tribute. And we'd like you to let us know too, get in touch with your memories about Bernard Cribbins and Wilf and Tom, everything associated with this much loved actor who's doubtless going to be very, very missed. It's strange to think that we're not going to see him in other things, hear him in more adverts. He read so many audiobooks. More on all that a little bit later on. But in the meantime, if you'd like to do some real-time traveling of your own, each and every edition of our show, past, present, and future, is just a tap or 2 away on the device of your choice if you know where to look. There's well over 100 now. Reviews, previews, interviews, geek-outs, and deep dives with all our regular panelists and other awesome guests. There's something for every fan at type40.podbean.com, both audio editions of our live stream shows, Type 40 Live, and the Type 40 podcast itself. There'll be more about all of that later on, and as well as a couple of minutes where we'll be making contact with the matrix of all knowledge that we call the Fandom Podcast Network for a word about all the other fantastic conversations that are going on, stretching across geek culture over there. Okay, so I think now we can sort of relax a little and take in some of the flavour of the career of Bernard Cribbins, some of his greatest hits, see how many memories that we can jog amongst ourselves, and there's plenty of I think some of the cream of British TV that you may have forgotten that Bernard Cribbins was actually involved in. Yeah, so Bernard Cribbins had been around since the 1950s. Can you believe it? He'd left school at the age of 13 and entered directly into showbiz, joining the Oldham Rep Theatre. He stayed there for 8 years, which he fitted in his national service with a parachute regiment, of all things, Ian. He fitted all that around being in the Rep.
Well, he was dedicated.
Quite an achievement. Yeah, he certainly was. So, there was more rep work in London, Liverpool, Manchester, all over the place before he made his West End debut in 1956. But he also had this strange parallel career, Simon. You might remember some of this too. As a recording artist, novelty singles and albums, working with George Martin of the Beatles fame, of all people.
Absolutely. I remember this very, very well as someone who grew up on Ed Stewpot's Junior Choice. Bernard Cribbins, I would probably hazard a guess, was on that show every single week. And Right Said Fred, we haven't even talked about Right Said Fred yet. That is truly, truly iconic and infamous and famous in equal measures. Who doesn't know Right Said Fred?
Inspiring.
Even spawned a band named after the song. He's one of these people, again, that we talk about a lot, where their shadow is very, very long. And I remember Right Said Fred, just so well from Saturday mornings listening to Junior Choice and
You would
holding
think,
Brown.
you would think, though, Simon, those records were so successful.
Yeah.
And yet a few years later, there he was, not just in the Dalek movie with Peter Cushing, but in a couple of Carry On films. He was in a film with Peter Sellers. He was in several pretty big British movies, big shows, Ian, like The Avengers, Space 1999, playing wildly different parts too.
Exactly. That's how good he was. Like in this episode of The Avengers, obviously The Avengers has played tongue-in-cheek the whole of the thing. He just matched that whole tone. You know what I mean? He, it wasn't like he was trying to pretend to be that tone. He just matched it, and that's how good he was. I keep saying how good he is. Seriously, compare him to some of the actors today. Just there's no comparison, really. There really
It's versatility, isn't it, Ian?
Yeah.
He's versatile. Simple as that.
Mm-hmm.
The Railway Children is a film that obviously means so much to so many people. A film that everybody seems to find. Probably because it turns up on ITV3. I think they show it seemingly most weekends. You've seen that one too, Charlotte?
I've seen bits of it because, like you said, I always seem to catch it like halfway through at Christmas when it's on during the day.
Yeah.
Or those sort of times.
Like The Sound of Music, Chitty Bang Bang, all those films. It's one of those.
It's definitely one of those. But I think it was quite odd for me to go back because I have now seen the Dalek movie he's in. And some of the, I think my parents were like, I'll watch a bit of the Wombles because that's what they grew up with.
Yeah.
And because the Doctor Who at one point was a thing that I'd watch with my dad and my brother and my mum, like especially Christmas, we'd all sit. I'd understand it. My parents would be a bit confused, and they reacted when Bernard came on screen. So I was like, "Who's that?" And I can remember they just sort of laughed and said, "Oh God, you need to go on YouTube. You'll find so many things." And they, like I said, they named Wombles, so it's just, and that's what was odd for me. But even seeing him young, I could just see the same traits, but maybe just a bit more amplified.
And the Wombles, for me, like Ian mentioned it earlier on, that was the big thing for me. I was just at that age. I was preschool when the Wombles was first on, brand new, and the novelty records that came with that Mike Batt put together. But the show seemed to be on daily, and Bernard Cribbins' voice in that was so idiosyncratic and so playful.
And another thing, Dan, his face and his persona and his voice represented England at that time.
Yeah,
he's all rainy bank holiday Mondays, and I mean, I think I always associate him with Waiting for My Tea, Simon, because of the Wombles and Jack and Ori.
I mean, the Wombles, I agree totally. It was the Wombles was certainly my first introduction to Bernard Cribbins. Obviously, I had no idea who was doing the voice. And again, this is key. You didn't know who was doing the voice. It didn't matter who was doing the voice. You just loved the voice and you loved the way he played it. And again, it just shows such incredible versatility. What I love about the Wombles, and if anybody out there has not yet watched any of those 5 minutes, about 4 minutes each, these Wombles. Yeah.
Very short, aren't they?
Give yourself a treat, go and watch them. And what I love about them is that they're so underplayed. And this is something that we've got to remember with Bernard Cribbins. He was brilliant at just underplaying parts. He would, again, it's the professionalism. He can just deliver the lines knowing that he's got the pitch just right without trying too hard. And so it just becomes effortless. And the Wombles, to me, is the absolute prime example of everything else.
They're all going about Seth MacFarlane, but if you look at Bernard Cribbins doing the many voices in the Wombles,
of course, because he voiced all of those characters. They were all very, very different, weren't they?
Especially Orinoco. He made him so lovable. That's the only character you'll gravitate towards is Orinoco. So
but you must remember when you were watching them all, he didn't Madame Cholet, he did he did them all, and it's such a deftness and a lightness of touch that the Wombles remains just an absolute joy. It really does.
Gold standard of kids shows, and I think that Arthur Lowe did the Mr. Men, for example.
He did, yes.
But he didn't have to do voices. He didn't have to inhabit the characters in the same way that Bernard managed to with all those Wombles. I can't remember how many characters there was, but there's certainly 7 or 8, and all the characters, the little characters, the human characters that would sort of flit in and out of it like that. And then you look across to that guest appearance in Fawlty Towers, playing one of many grotesque characters that books into Fawlty Towers there, and has his run-in with John Cleese as Basil Fawlty. And he's also buttoned up and really uptight and desperately unpleasant. And he's one of the very few characters who sort of challenges Fawlty himself for being such a nasty piece of work. You know, you want to see him get his comeuppance as well, don't you? And you think it's the same bloke.
That's the irony. You still absolutely love and that's why, again, he's just so good at playing any part, because even when he's playing a nasty part, you still love him to bits. How do you do that? I don't know how he's managed to do that.
In that one, Basil thinks that he's the hotel inspector, doesn't he? But he turns out he sells like cutlery and stuff like that, and they get into this sort of tete-a-tete. And it's just a joy to watch. And you can imagine how they worked on that material together. And because obviously Fawlty Towers was a very complex show, and it probably would have intimidated a lot of people. You think about the people who were in that, not just Bernard Cribbins, but Una Stubbs was in that too. Lots of Nicky Henson, lots of those kind of actors who would turn up in everything. And you can see, no doubt at all that they're having a blast doing it. But yeah, all of that at the same time that he was voicing the Wombles, that he was dropping in on shows like Space 1999. I wouldn't necessarily call that hard sci-fi, but it was played completely and utterly straight. And I don't think I know of. I don't want to turn into this sort of constant repeating of myself, where I'm moaning about current talent compared to this generation of talent. But I seriously can't think of anybody that I'm aware of now who could spread themselves that thick across so many completely different things.
No,
at the same time.
Go ahead. Sorry.
I was going to say, I think that's because nowadays actors sometimes think that voice work is the same, and you can just go from being an actor on stage to doing whether that's narration work or audio work or anything. And I think that's a real big misunderstanding, because voice work, I think, is like the hardest work you can do, because you haven't got props on screen, you haven't got your body language, you sort of disarmed in so many ways, and you've just got your voice. And Bernard could do that.
The thing is though, today now doing voiceovers is celebrated and known as fantastic art. But when Bernard was doing it, when Tim Brooke Taylor was doing it, when what's his name, Terry Scott was doing it, it was considered something the lowest of the low. To do a kids show, and it just goes to prove that those kind of actors, right? They weren't concerned about what other people thought of them as an actor. They do the job, the best of their abilities, and then move on to the next job. You should just listen to someone like Terry Scott playing Penfold in Danger Mouse. It's freaking fantastic. It really is. And I don't say that lightly.
I was trying to think of other people that I could think of that came close to Bernard Cribbins, and the only one I could think of was Terry Scott, because he also used to play most of his roles, whether it was, he did the novelty records too, but most of his roles he would play grown men who were kind of like inner children, didn't he, Simon? You could imagine him still playing conkers in his 40s and 50s. It was that kind of thing.
I just like to say that I saw a footage, it was old footage in the 70s of Tim Brooke Taylor, Terry Scott, and even what's his name, the guy in Only Fools and Horses, I can't remember his name, David Jason, doing the voiceovers, and they were literally like this. They had a little square thing, and they were doing the voice, blah blah blah, like that. You watch the people today when they do Disney. They got this huge space. They're allowed to move their bodies. They like to get, because they want to get the thing out. But try doing it in the 70s, man. I'm telling you, that's how good they were.
Where you're basically in a cupboard, weren't you? It's like, right,
that's how good they were.
Go.
And what I think is interesting is, you're right. about modern day voiceovers, an actor that everybody that is a regular viewer of the show will know I love is Ben Whishaw, and as we know, he did the voice of Paddington Bear.
Yeah, he did. Yeah.
I'm sorry, but I personally think it's awful. I think it's just terrible. I love Ben Whishaw, but he's completely miscast, and because he simply is not a voiceover artist. And I think of Paddington Bear in those films being voiced by Bernard Cribbins, and I'm like, that's the voice I want to hear playing Paddington Bear. It's an art.
It's a different.
I think people underestimate the difficulty of doing good voiceover work. They think they can just stand in front of a mic and, as Ian says, emote a little bit, throw their arms around and really get into it. And it's going to be, but it's not. That's not how it works. And Bernard just did it effortlessly, as did Terry.
I suppose you could say that now we've got this, we've got the whole genre of audiobooks and Audible and all this kind of thing. For people who are too lazy like me to properly read, get stuff read to you. But you could say that a lot of that could have started with Jack and Ori. And my earliest memories of Bernard himself, that there's a face, was all those appearances on Jack and Ori. Waiting, as I said earlier on, waiting for my tea to be ready. That was the show. It was on for 10 or 15 minutes. And it did seem strangely like his show. I mean, that ran for well over 20 years, didn't it? But it turns out that it's not just your memory playing tricks on you. He did read more stories than anybody else. 25 books across nearly 100 episodes of that. And he was, as you say, plenty of other big talent read stories on Jack and Ori. Everybody from Rick Mail to Jeremy Irons, Floella Benjamin, all these people that we knew from other things. Sylvester McCoy, he read for Jack and Ori too, maybe once or twice.
They're all of that.
Bernard Cribbins was the king. It's his show, his wheelhouse.
Show.
I think it was. I think it was a case of it was never too long before anybody else. You felt that they were warming Bernard's seat for him. It was never too long before
I don't
Bernard
think
was
so.
back on that show.
I remember when Spike Milligan did it. That was absolutely hilarious.
Yeah,
I mean, it just goes to show, don't it? The whole world has changed when it comes to being famous. Spike Milligan was probably the most well-known character of the 70s. Everybody knew him, yet he wouldn't think anything of doing Jack and Ori or even a cartoon or anything like that. Do you know what I mean? It's the whole aspect of being an actor has changed now. It's completely different now, the way they think about themselves. But anyway, whatever.
And they would never, because Spike was infamous, wasn't he? And he was a more so, whereas Bernard was safe pair of hands. They probably knew that getting him onto anything, they knew what they were going to get, and that it would, but with somebody like Spike. But again, there's less taking of chances in modern TV. And you could say that Russell T Davies took a chance on Bernard Cribbins as Wilf Mott when he got him back onto Doctor Who. Well, you could say, would the audience latch onto him? Would a 21st century audience latch onto him as Wilf Mott the way that we latched onto him in the 70s?
I think they did. Look, you just got to listen to Charlotte. She latched onto him. Yeah, there you go. So
but and I also think Russell took a chance in the bit how Wilf was characterized, because he was incredibly patriotic. He was he loved being British. He loved the Queen, like all those things, which I think sometimes in the modern days looked down on. And the fact that we had this character that was, no, I'm proud and I'm going to show my flag. I'm going to show like how I feel about my country. And maybe that's why I think I did quite like him from the beginning, because I think I like it when I see characters like that.
Because he has values.
To see it. Yeah.
We must give Russell T credit for the writing for Wilf. Do you know what I mean? So, he could have just dismissed him, but he didn't. He made him into a character. And then, as Charlotte says, he replaced the guy that died, and the rest is history. But, as I said, I don't think it's you're not taking a chance when you're actually hiring a veteran actor, because you know what you're going to get. They're going to be professional. They're going to do their job, stand on their mark, and go home. Do you know what I mean? It's not
I mean,
like
for his part in Voyage of the Damned, perhaps not, because it was a cameo part. I think that's how it was written. I think that's kind of, whilst I wouldn't say that's how Bernard performed it, I think he was aware of his part in proceedings. But the fact that after the fact, I mean, apparently it was before Voyage of the Damned had even been screened, Bernard had signed to be that regular recurring character in Series 4, but they worked so far in advance at that point that audience reaction wasn't even in the mix, I suppose. They saw something in that, knew that what he'd given, that they, I suppose, when they'd watched early cuts of it, we can do something with this character. We've lost our original actor and the version of those stories that we wanted to tell. We can lean on somebody like Bernard Cribbins, who clearly still has it, who still has this youthful energy, who could work to our schedule. We could have him on location. He's still a very active man. You can imagine it flashing up like a big neon light to go anywhere else. It would have been ridiculous. He's a ready-made man to come in and to give that production what it really needed. I wouldn't say it at a time of chaos, but they didn't count on losing that actor. In comes Bernard Cribbins. It's a shorthand in a sense because everybody knows him, and for those generations like Charlotte who hadn't seen him in anything before, he could make up that distance because he was so seasoned.
In many ways,
I don't know. It might have been an accident. It might have been just they were just making up as they went along. Because as Charlotte said, the guy died, and they got Bernard Cribbins in, and they might have just wrote him into that bit and go right, and then forgot about it. And as they were writing, they were like, okay, well, what about Bernard Cribbins? Do you know what I mean? Could it happen like that? You talk like it was planned. I don't think it was planned. I think it was just he was just lucky because let's face it, he was put out to pasture for a very, very long time. Until Doctor Who came along.
No, I think you're misunderstanding what I'm saying. I'd say they were kind of. When an actor who they cast in a role, they knew that Donna's dad was going to be in that place. To lose him as they were about to enter production, it wasn't planned. That's what they needed. They needed somebody who could fill that role right away. Yes. And they knew they could reach for Bernard Cribbins. That's what I mean.
You almost wonder what they were thinking of, why they didn't cast him beforehand anyway. It's almost like, why did it take you so long to realise you needed Bernard Cribbins in your show? In many ways, he should have been the first name they came to almost in funny. On, if you know what I mean. Yeah,
it's funny because he played an integral part in the death of the David Tennant Doctor, didn't he? Yeah. He's like a huge piece of the puzzle, isn't he? And who would have thought just by his cameo, he would end up in the last... Sorry, go ahead.
No. I was just going to say as well, I mean, it's always broken my heart. I still think he would have been a fantastic Doctor. Why was he never cast?
God, yeah.
Well, we'll come back to that a little later on because there is a story. You can imagine there's going to be a story with somebody who was acting for so long. Of course, there's a story. But yet, all those multiple appearances across Series 4 of Doctor Who for Bernard Cribbins as Wilfred Mott, right from Partners in Crime, where we first see Donna and Wilf together, don't we, at the allotments, and all of that dialogue between them. We've recently reviewed that for an upcoming episode of Type 40, and hearing it all again, seeing them in those parts. My God, it's so loaded, not just with emotion. There's nothing mawkish about any of this. It's played on so many levels, and I don't think this is unique to this material and these two characters. I believe that this was a standard of quality that runs right across the Russell T Davies years, and a kind of drama that he can just tell, and characters that he can flesh out.
Well, they both had something in common, didn't they, Donna and Wilf, didn't they? That they basically didn't want to be within spitting distance of the mother because she was such a pain in the ass.
I mean, you could say that they were both dreamers if you want to be if you want to look at the nicer side to it. But yeah, there was that. There was the generation in the middle that made both their lives more difficult than it needed to be, that stopped them from doing the things that they really wanted to do, and telling them that they both got their heads in the clouds.
Yeah, I mean, Wilf could see that Donna was a dreamer just like him. I guess that's why they connect. so well.
Yeah.
As I said, that scene in the kitchen just said it all, really. But the relationship between her and her mum and Wilf, and obviously, so there you go.
The other deep regret that I have, that I really wish had happened, is that the character hadn't been Wilfred Mott at all, but had been Tom Campbell. I still think that would have been so cool for Russell.
People say that.
And even if necessary, you didn't even have to give him a surname. Don't give him the surname Campbell. Just call him Tom, and just leave us to work out, is that Tom from Dalek's Invasion film? I still think that was something of a missed opportunity.
But they didn't have the rights, did they? Is there something? No, you guys know more than me.
You didn't necessarily have to call him Tom Campbell, although I would have, just Tom. And as Russell T Davies was so deft at doing, he would occasionally just be able to, Tom, the character played by Bernard Cribbins, would have just every so often just been able to do a little wink and a little nod of understanding to, say, Donna, for example, or that for us fans would maybe let us know, actually, he does know what he's talking about, because this is the character we know from the Dalek films, without it actually being spelled out, without it being explained. It just could have been so deftly handled and subtly and lightly handled, and it just the odd nod and the wink that. And
there was that scene. He did get to dish it out to the Daleks again, though, didn't he? There was that scene with was it a paint gun, Charlotte?
Yes, I love that scene because it's such a high stakes finale. You've got Rose back, you've got the Daleks invasion, and then there's Wilf with his paint gun, and I just love the moment when he shoots it and it looks like it's worked. And just a beaming smile on his face, and then it like uses heat to like make it go away, and he's just like, oh. And then once Rose has shot it, he's like, do you want to swap? And it's just, that's something that I can so imagine that line he did ad lib.
Yeah, apparently that was ad libbed, and the whole thing with the paint gun was Bernard's idea. He went to Russell with that, and Russell said, "Yeah, we'll use that. We'll put it in."
Yeah, and I think Wilf, at the end of the day, was the uplifter for Donna. He encouraged her.
Yeah, he did. But the thing is, I don't think I know why they didn't call him Tom, and I know why they couldn't. I mean, I know it's got something to do with
I get it as well.
Yeah, and also towards the ending, if that was the case and they did do that, then he would have to know who the Doctor is at the ending and all that stuff. So, and it wouldn't have worked so well.
No, it would, but in a parallel dimension, I really do like to think that it would have been lovely to have him.
But remember, Russell T did not like the Paul McGann Doctor Who film at all, and he changed his mind halfway through making this, didn't they? He included him in the canon because there's that scene in it where the Doctor loses his memory. I can't remember what story that was, and he had a diary. Yeah,
I don't think that's necessary. I don't get the impression that Russell particularly disliked the TV movie, but I don't think he wanted to lean on that, especially.
Really, he did slag it off in that TV show he made on Channel 4. What was that show he made on Channel 4?
Oh, Queer as Folk.
Yeah, there was that scene where they're all at the table, and they're slagging off. They said, "No, that's not part of canon at all." And Russell T wrote that. So
I didn't know that because I've seen him. Yeah. He has said some nice things about it in other places, but I can quite believe that what people say. But even Russell T Davies, what he says publicly and how he feels could be drastically different, as I think we're seeing playing out over the next year or two. But that's another story.
Absolutely.
All this stuff with Wilf and the Doctor in those final 2 episodes in the End of Time. We've seen him make those appearances, and he was in the Sontaran 2-parter, wasn't he, Charlotte? He was littered throughout Series 4, and yet when it comes to the 10th Doctor's final adventure, he's had those other companions, hasn't he? I don't know if you class them as proper companions. Michelle Ryan played Lady Christina, was it?
Christina,
and got Lindsay Duncan was in one, fantastic actress. You'd got David Morrissey in another. They've got these great actors in great parts. But when it came to this 2-part finale, to bring up Bernard Cribbins, to bring him back to the story at a point where Donna had exited, again, this was a great investment of faith in this actor who was senior who couldn't run around, it's such a charged two-part story. I know lots of people have different thoughts about all of that, but what I think does nail it down is the dynamic between those two men. Two old soldiers, I think, is what they lean on, isn't it, Charlotte? That's what sort of bonds them there. Ian said something earlier on about this, but I think when there's that many layers to it, that the Doctor feels like he knows he's reaching an end point that he's been holding off, and he sees in Wilf something that I think Wilf is completely oblivious to it, but he's loyal to him because of Donna, I suppose.
Yeah, and it's not just because of Donna. I think, honestly, Wilf at that point sees the Doctor as this incredible force for good, and he recognises that and he wants to protect it. I think, but I was thinking about this. I honestly don't think it would have worked with a younger companion in these final 2 episodes, because the Doctor needed somebody with life experience. Mm-hmm. He needed somebody who'd been around, who'd been a soldier, like you said, and that was a big thing they talked about, because at that point Russell hadn't really gone a lot into the Time War as well. It was sort of in the background, and we knew about it, but it felt like in these specials we got a bit more of an insight, purely because Wilf could share his experiences fighting with the Doctor. And it sort of connected that bit back, which is nice for Tennant leaving to have that sort of reintroduction almost of the Time War again. And of course, the Master was there, and his sort of reactions to the Master. You could see he hated the Master. So I hated him too. Yeah.
I love the bit where he says, "You're young, you don't understand," and the Doctor's like, "No, I'm 900 years old." Do you know what I mean? And like Wilf is like, "What?" So I love that bit. That was a really good scene in that scene. But as I said, Bernard Cribbins, he was an amazing actor. As I said, you'd be a fool not to hire him if he was available, because he knew exactly what he's doing. There was no risk there at all.
Mm-hmm. And maybe Doctor Who didn't revive his career as such, but it's a time in anybody's life where they'd be forgiven for just powering down, I suppose you could say, for doing less. And there he was in a high-profile, an essential part, Simon, of what was probably the biggest show on TV at the time. It gave his career this big push, didn't it? He got a show on CBeebies. I think that came about largely off the back of playing Wilf when he was the lead in Old Jack's Boat, which was another sort of riff on Jack and Ori, wasn't it? He would tell stories to children out of this old boat. He played an old retired fisherman or something like that. Sarah Graham talks about that, how she watched it with her kids. But I can't imagine that would have come about had it not been for playing Wilf in Doctor Who.
I think it's probably reasonably fair to assume that Bernard Cribbins at that point in his career thought that his career wasn't necessarily over, but that his days of glory were over, and he'd had his 15 minutes of fame, certainly. And so I think it probably would have been a huge surprise to him to actually discover, no, there was another couple of minutes fame on the way for him that he hadn't seen coming. And again, this is just a testament to the quality of Doctor Who at that time, that it could do no wrong. Everything he touched did kind of turn to gold at that point. And he was, bless him, Bernard was there just at the right moment to go in and capitalise on that by playing this part that, I think you're quite right, Dan, did just launch, just not a second career by any means, but a nice little twilight to his career. I think it's fair to say that we probably wouldn't have heard much or anything from Bernard Cribbins had it not been for Doctor Who knocking on his door and at that precise moment in time, and just giving him just that final little lift up towards the end. So good on for that.
I did feel my heart. Well, it wasn't my heart was my. I felt really not depressed, a bit sad when we saw the first pictures from the 60th or anniversary where he was in the wheelchair. Yeah. And David Tennant was pushing him, and I felt sad just that looking at him, because when you see him in the last episodes, he's he could stand and he looked, and this picture made me feel sad for him, because you realize how old he really is there. And it's sad. So, but, you know, everybody has to die sooner or later, don't they? Some people should sooner rather than later. But there you go.
It's like we talked about earlier. You forget that he almost had a finite life. He just did seem like he was going to be around forever, and so it comes as a bit of a surprise when you
forget how many years have passed.
Tom Baker is another case in point. You know, Tom. You feel that Tom will be around forever.
Yeah.
And so it's a bit of a shock when you see him, and maybe he doesn't look quite as young as he did 5 years ago.
It was a shock because you don't realize how many years have gone past.
Yeah,
because we're living our lives at the same time, aren't we?
Yeah.
At the top of the show, we played that clip of Bernard Cribbins accepting that National Television Award on behalf of the entire production team for Doctor Who back in the late noughties. He was really, again, he was dropped in at the deep end there by David Tennant. Go on, mate, he said to him like that. And you could see, totally, he had no idea that was going to happen. And he just comes up with a speech off the top of his head.
He's a professional.
Yeah, he just handles the business, doesn't he? He handles it all so well. But you can see when you look at the faces of David Tennant, and you can see stood behind him are Julie Gardner, Russell T Davies, Liz Sladen's there, and you can see them smiling at him, you know, that loving the moment, and that they will cherish that memory, as we'll all cherish the memory of Bernard Cribbins, of being entertained by him over so many decades. We'll be back with a few more tributes and memories after this quick break. It's that time in the show where we shoot off into a parallel dimension to fill you in on everything that's going on all the other fabulous podcasts across the Fandom Podcast Network. So here's our friend Kevin with all of that. We'll see you back here in a couple of minutes with more about the legend that is Bernard Cribbins.
Thank you for listening. We hope you're enjoying this podcast. We'd like to continue to feed your ears by inviting you to listen to these other great shows on the Fandom Podcast Network. It starts with our flagship show, Culture Clash, discussing the latest in entertainment pop culture. Bloody Kings, Immortals Take Notice, our show covering the entire Highlander universe. Couch Potato Theaters, where we celebrate our favorite movies. Time Warp, the Fandom Flashback podcast discussing a year in movies and our favorite retro movie and TV pop culture topics. Good Evening, discussing all things Alfred Hitchcock. Union Federation, our Star Trek and Orville show. Hair Metal, the 80s and early 90s rock metal podcast. Type 40, our show covering the time-traveling Doctor Who universe with host Dan Hadley. Lethal Mullet, an 80s and 90s action film podcast with host Adam P. O'Brien. Also check out the Lethal Mullet Network for more great podcasts. What a Piece of Junk, a Star Wars podcast with hosts Scott, Derek, and Nathan. Making Treks, a Star Trek podcast, a deep dive into the final frontier with host Mark Newbold and Adam P. O'Brien. And check out our newest shows, The Fandom Show, our monthly Fandom Podcast Network live YouTube exclusive show about the month's hottest topics in fandom, and the FPN True Believers MCU podcast, discussing the Marvel Cinematic Universe and the related Marvel television and streaming MCU universe, including the connections to the original Marvel comics. You can find the Fandom Podcast Network on several platforms. Please subscribe to the Fandom Podcast Network YouTube channel to receive notifications of new podcast episodes and live events. You can enjoy all of the Fandom Podcast Network audio podcasts on our master feed at fpnet.podbean.com. The Fandom Podcast Network is on all major podcast platforms, including Apple Podcast and iTunes. You can find the Fandom Podcast Network on Facebook. You can email us at fandompodcastnetwork@gmail.com. You can also find the Fandom Podcast Network on Instagram at Fandom Podcast Network and on Twitter at FanPod Network. Thank you for listening, and remember, respect others and enjoy your fandom.
Yes, we've teased and tantalised you there as always, and we can even clothe you too. There's merch to match. Sorry, JT, but there is merch to match all of those shows, including Type 40. If you head over to tpublic.com, search for the Fandom Podcast Network, and there you'll find the storefront full of all the team colours for all of the podcasts, on everything from T-shirts to mugs to phone cases, and those huge tapestries I'm never sure who has those or where they put them, but they do sell. Tapestries are there too. Seeing is believing. Treat yourself, treat your other selves, and it all goes to support the Fandom Podcast Network into the bargain. We're here celebrating the life and the work of Bernard Cribbins, who passed away just a few days ago at the age of 93. All of us here paying our respects and reliving some great memories from times past, where he's entertained so many generations of British kids and people now all over the world. I think largely through Doctor Who. I would imagine that's the work that he's done that's travelled the most. I don't think it's a big reach to say that. There's been a few tributes, obviously, over the last few days from people within the Doctor Who world we're going to concentrate on, but there's been so many because he did work with them all. I thought we'd start with this one. This is from John Barrowman, who says that when I started my career in 1989 in Thingos, Bernard Cribbins was by my side as a gracious co-star, but also as a teacher and mentor, showing me subtleties of comic timing and stagecraft. Not to mention where to get the best fish and chips and custard cream donuts in Soho. It should come as no surprise, really, that Bernard and John Barrowman worked together, really, should Simon?
No, what comes more as a surprise is the fact that I've never discovered custard cream donuts in Soho. I'm on a mission. I need to know where to get those from. No, absolutely not. I mean, what's interesting, though, is John Barrowman is one of those Marmite people, isn't he? You either love him or you oppose him. And that goes to prove what I was saying earlier, that Bernard Cribbins is one of those that everybody loves. But no, it also just goes to show the versatility that we've talked about before of the guy, above and beyond so many. I mean, you have to wonder, when you say lots of Doctor Who alumni are lining up to pay, quite rightly, their tributes to him, and you kind of think, I wonder whether Bernard Cribbins is the most prolific performer ever to have appeared in Doctor Who, in that, is he the person with the longest list of credits elsewhere? It's possible. I don't know. I think maybe John Pertwee might be a contender. I don't know. I think Bernard Cribbins could well be the person with the longest list overall of credits that's ever worked in Doctor Who. But I'm happy for somebody to challenge me on that one.
I think over 70 years of a career, I think logistically that's likely anyway. But the fact that throughout all that time he had very few lulls in that ear, Simon's probably onto something there, isn't he?
Yeah, I mean, the guy's been around for a very long time. He's done a lot of stuff. When did he start? The 40s? Was it 50s?
50s, 1950. His first credit was in 1956.
Well, also, what we have to think about here is he was in the Dalek movie in '66, which was series 3.
I was one.
which was I was -2, which was series 3 of the main series of Doctor Who on TV at that time. So let's just extrapolate that for a second. Let's imagine that he was in Doctor Who at that time in series 3. So what we're talking about is a Doctor Who career from series 3 right up to the 60th anniversary special. That's got to be the longest span of any actor ever to have worked on Doctor Who. Surely, again, it's got to be. I can't think of another contender.
I can't think of anybody else who could even come close. Whatever part that they played, even Doctors, which brings us to this guy. Colin Baker has also paid tribute to Bernard Cribbins, and now dear Bernard Cribbins has left us. The world and the acting profession will be poorer without him. A lovely man, a fine, subtle actor. He was Dangerous Davies in 1980, and he arrested me. It was an honour, says Colin there. Again, Colin been around for a long time now. I think his first roles were probably in the early 70s, but plenty of lulls. He's not as versatile as Bernard was, and he'd probably be the first to concede that. I think that John Pertwee, you may be right because of all the radio he did and lots of stage work too. But I think we could be, I think we could be on a bit of a fool's errand trying to find anybody. So please let us know. Get in touch with us here at Type 40 at Instagram and Twitter. or let us know in the comments section to the video track if you think there's anybody out there who could possibly challenge our Bernard's record there for simple credits throughout his 70-odd years in show business, I suppose you could call it. It sounds like a cliche, doesn't it, Ian, in show business? It sounds so variety club, but I suppose that Bernard was. Yeah,
it was in those days.
The very model of all that. You know, you talk about who could possibly be nasty to Bernard Cribbins. I think we mentioned that earlier on, the master. John Sim, he agrees with you. He's put out this tribute. He says that being horrible to Wilf was one of the most difficult things I've ever had to do as an actor. Wiping out a tenth of the population didn't bat an eyelid. But to be mean to Bernard Cribbins, a challenge. He'd look at me after a take, and with that lovely twinkle in his eye, he would say, "Oh, you horrible sod."
That's very Bernard Cribbins, isn't it?
It is. You can hear his voice, can't you?
And again, that's one of the things that's so lovely about Bernard Cribbins is he clearly loved what he did. He really enjoyed his work.
It's his life.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, you know, for fear of banging on about modern celebrities, but boy, am I fed up of hearing them bemoaning how difficult they can't go.
It's such a hard life, isn't it, Simon?
Yeah, I'm not interested in all of that. It's boring, it's dull, and I don't care. Whereas Bernard Cribbins clearly loved everything he did, and it exudes into every performance he gives and every interview that he does. And let's not forget, he didn't do that many interviews. He was
he didn't.
And again, that's part of the charm. Comes back.
I think we're being a bit unfair to some of the actors of today. Yeah, there are some stupid actors that will just, you know, put their life out there on social media. But you know, we've got to be honest here. It was a different time for Bernard. It was a different time for that generation. And I, you know, if I had to choose which world to be in, I'd rather be in the Bernard world, because it was a point where your life was your own private thing, and if you were a star, that's all the audience knew of you, of being that star. And I think that's much better than what they've got today, where somebody just shows you everything they're doing every second, every day. It's whatever.
I was just thinking that phrase, Bernard world. Maybe there is a world, a parallel universe, a parallel world out there where just like the Womble, Charlotte, where we're all voiced by Bernard Cribbins. And that'd be quite.
I was about to say that it's hard for Charlotte to connect to what me and Simon. Not sure about Dan. Me and Simon are saying, really. You know, when it comes to the Wombles, because it was a very different time. You have to understand, Charlotte, because there was no such thing as social media, and all we did was connect to the TV. So when you came home from school, it was Jack and Nori, and then you had your tea. Nobody has tea anymore, right? Nobody has tea anymore. And then it was like,
I
what
do.
is it?
Ian,
well,
know I have
yeah,
tea.
I know you do. Yeah, I know you do. But I'm just saying that, and then it was dinner? I think they call it lunch now, but I remember it was it breakfast, dinner, tea, and then something in the evening as well. Do you know what I mean?
Supper. You're talking about supper, aren't you?
Supper, that's it. Supper.
Yeah, maybe we are being unfair on modern actors, because it is, as you say, it is a different world. We've got a tribute to from a modern actor too. This one's from Yasmin Finney, who obviously is in the cast of the 60th anniversary material. We still don't know the shape of it, how much of it, what it's called, none of that, but we do know that she's in it with him, and put out this tribute here. You will always be loved, Bernie, aka the best Grandad I could ever have asked for.
Yeah,
nice. Russell T Davies chips in there too.
On this particular issue, what has been really in my mind over all of this since we heard this sad news that Bernard had gone is I'm praying that they finished filming stuff with him.
I think they did.
I believe so.
I think they did.
Okay, because that would be awful if it was the case.
It would.
They had to lose what was shot because they had.
Yasmin has also finished on the show, and I believe so has Jacqueline King, who plays Sylvia too. So they have moved on. They are still filming.
And for fear of that sounding like that's just me being selfish, it isn't. On the contrary, it's me thinking, okay, what a fantastic tribute the 60th will be to Bernard, the fact that he is in there as the character that is so loved. So I'm delighted to think that he's in there. And they
Well, they're going to obviously put something in the beginning of it to burn, or the Americans would say Bernard.
One would hope so. Speaking about the 60th anniversary material as well, we do have this from Russell T Davies, a big tribute here, and he says that he knew everyone. He'd talk about the Beatles, David Niven, and how he once sat on the stairs at a party impersonating bird calls with T.H. White. Then he'd add, I said to Ashley Banjo last week. All these names from throughout the decades. He loved being in Doctor Who, says Russell. He said, children are calling me Grandad in the street. His first day was on location with Kylie Minogue, but all eyes, even Kylie's, were on Bernard. He turned up with a suitcase full of props just in case, including a rubber chicken.
Of course he did.
Fantastic.
And Russell finishes off with, and what an actor. Really, though, what a wonderful actor. We once took him to the TV Choice Awards and sent him up on his own to collect that award, and the entire room stood up and cheered him. Thanks for everything. My old soldier, a legend, has left this world.
Yeah, it's true. It is true. He was a legend. He will remain a legend forevermore.
Yeah, but it was the end line that I adore. Thanks for everything, my old soldier.
Mm-hmm.
And you can just see how much he meant to Russell.
Mm-hmm.
And like what you were saying about hopefully he's filmed his scenes. I'd be very surprised if Russell didn't understand his health at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And probably was very thinking, I've probably only got a very small time I can film. So to get the best of what I can out of that time.
Yeah.
And I think I spoke to a few people who are basically said to me, watching the 60th is going to be so much harder now because of the emotion and because we know that this is probably the last thing we're going to see him in. And it's just going to add. If there wasn't enough emotion with it being the 60th and having certain characters back, it's just like, I can remember the day when the photos leaked, because it's not even yet been fully announced. We just saw the filming. And the reaction online, people were just so happy. Like, I think I even saw more happiness for Wilf with some people than David Tennant coming back.
It did seem like the icing on the cake somehow, didn't it?
I think it's because of the warmth that Bernard has always exuded, and the warmth that's exuded from his characters, that you just can't help warming to him, and loving the fact that he's there. I mean, I would imagine, I don't know, I would imagine that he possibly was only on location for a couple of days, shooting what I suspect is probably a cameo, and maybe
it's hard to say, isn't it?
Yeah, it's impossible to say. Maybe we have, and no doubt JT would be sort of telling me to stop speculating, but I'm guessing that's probably what might be happening. And if that's the case, then if nothing else, we have possibly Russell to thank for just ensuring that Wilf was in there and Bernard was quite rightly remembered in the 60th anniversary special.
Numerous people too have mentioned the fact, Ian, how at the time of his passing as well, Bernard as an actor, well into his 90s, also had a film currently playing in cinemas. Many cinemas up and down the country are currently screening that double bill, Doctor Who and the Daleks and Daleks Invasion Earth 2150. Bernard plays such a key part in that second movie, and I would imagine that he knew about that. And I hope that
it makes me laugh because he after he gets battered in the head, he literally opens the door to the TARDIS, and you're like, don't they lock that thing? Do you know what I mean? He goes, he's like, oh, he faints. You're like, what the hell? Anyway, sorry.
Wonderful stuff. We got one more quote here. This is from Bad Wolf Studios themselves, who say that Bernard brought humour, wit, and warmth to the screen and also to the set. He was the heart and soul of the noble family and looked up to the stars on screen and in life. He will be hugely missed by everyone on Doctor Who, and all our thoughts are with his family at this time.
That's nice.
It's one of those things, isn't it, where whenever somebody dies, you get these kind of tributes. But in this particular case, I genuinely think everyone of them is really, really heartfelt. Because, like I said at the beginning, I just don't think there's anybody that didn't.
No, but to be honest, though, seriously, these people feel they have to say something because of social media. Again, because of social media. I mean, in the old days when there wasn't social media, you'd have people on the news maybe saying a couple of bits, but the majority of people wouldn't say anything. But they would feel it, obviously, and stuff like that. But it's just sometimes it just comes across as very crash to me, like
I agree.
Put that thing out. Do they mean it, or do they have to do that because of because of who they are? Do you know what I mean? Stuff like that. So it's kind of I don't know. Maybe I just hate this generation.
We do have a short clip here of two people who worked with Bernard Cribbins very, very closely on Doctor Who. See what they've got to say.
Lovely. I mean, he was genuinely lovely. He had a warmth about him and a twinkle about him.
It's a huge takeaway for sort of, I think, our lives and certainly our careers to have had him in it. And there's a Bernard Cribbins shaped hole in the world now.
Yes, so the crew and the cast of Doctor Who join us in sending a big final salute out there to Bernard Cribbins, not just for Wilfred Mott and Tom Campbell, but all those memories from all over the decades, every role we've seen him in. And looking across at other appearances in Doctor Who, I want to talk just briefly about this, because it's alleged that during that time where Russell was putting together his material, that he'd heard, because he was a big supporter of the Big Finish range, and Bernard Cribbins was in this story from 2007, so just a year before. He was in The Horror of Glam Rock, which was an Eighth Doctor.
Which is a good one. I've listened to this.
He was there with the late Stephen Gately, and the director of that one, Barnaby Edwards, who, as you may know, worked and probably still works as a Dalek operator on Doctor Who. He believes that Russell had heard it, and off that gave him that cameo role in Voyage of the Dam. That's Claire Buckfield. She's also in that drama there with the late Stephen Gately from Boyzone. I think it was Boyzone or Westlife. I can't remember which band of those is which. So there's that too.
What part is he playing in that then, Dan? I've not heard.
He plays a glam rock band's manager. So that's quite a sort of spivvy character. A spivvy character called Arnold Corns.
He actually plays a bit of a nasty piece. He's not a nice character.
That's really interesting. Really interesting, because Arnold Corns is there's a David Bowie connection with Arnold Corns. Arnold Corns, I think, as I recall, is the name of a band that Bowie wrote some material for back in the 60s or 70s. So they've obviously done a clever little thing with linking all that in. But it's interesting that he's playing a baddie. He doesn't play many baddies.
He does. Does he look like that now? Then is he, or is this? How long ago was this taken?
This was in 2007.
Okay.
Oh yeah. Okay. So they're a lot older now.
Yeah, and he did read one of the official BBC novels, Beautiful Chaos by Gary Russell. He read the entirety of that. I would imagine he'd do not just the voice of Wilf, but pretty much everybody else, knowing Bernard. And then there was a Big Finish drama called No Place 2, written by James Goss, which featured the entire Noble clan there. That was part of the 10th Doctor's Adventures range of full cast drama. So Bernard returned to his role, just as Jacqueline King and Catherine Tate did. So those extra doses of Wilf Mott, they're out there too. But we do have the big one, don't we, coming for the 60th anniversary. We don't know how much of Wilf or Bernard Cribbins that we're going to get in that, but I'm looking forward to it. Hope you are too. All of the Diamond anniversary material that's coming, we know so little about it, but I remain very, very excited, and it's so fitting that Bernard Cribbins is there. He's present and correct in his what sadly will be his final role. There are, as always, though, Ian, there are other stories connected with Doctor Who. Simon, you mentioned it earlier on, because an actor like Bernard Cribbins, we talked about him being in the same bracket as the John Pertwees and the Tom Bakers, and just like David Warner, another actor who passed away last week, and you think, he'd have made a brilliant Doctor Who, and why didn't this and why didn't that? People say this about Bernard Cribbins. Why was he never Doctor Who? Well, the truth of the matter is that he did audition. It could have happened. Bernard Cribbins auditioned for Barry Letts back when John Pertwee was leaving the show. He was one of the many actors that were being considered then. They weren't really sure, Simon, about what direction to go with the character at that time. Were they following John Pertwee? They were making a commitment, weren't they, originally to go much older with the actor, and that's how Ian Marter got involved. But it seems that they were looking at middle-aged actors too, and Bernard Cribbins went in there and spoke to Barry about it. Have you ever heard this story?
Yeah, now you mention it, I have heard it, and I think at the same time, wasn't that also when they saw Jim Dale, also from the Carry On films, who was a similar kind of character actor to Bernard Cribbins, and they also saw Michael Bentine, I think, at the same time, didn't they? So you kind of get the feel of the kind of person that they were looking at that point. Do we know? I'm not certain why Bernard either turned down the part or was not cast. Did he turn it down?
Well, we only have a tiny anecdote about this, but we do have it on Bernard's authority. In his own words, he went in there and he spoke to Barry about it, and Barry asked him, "Well, how would you play the part?" And the only quote we have from Bernard is that he told him, "Well, I was a paratrooper, so I can fight." And apparently Barry didn't like that Bernard saw it as that kind of role. Where the Doctor would be a violent character?
No, because Barry, of course, was a Buddhist, and so was very much on his compassionate side. What a shame that we were robbed of Bernard. But then we wouldn't have had Tom Baker. So it's sliding doors, isn't it? It's left turns. Who knows?
And in interviews since, Bernard Cribbins often remarked to the fact that Tom Baker, when he took the role, there were several times where Tom did get pretty rough and tumble with people. It was like the Seeds of Doomy, and we only have this tiny fraction of what could have been an hour or two between the two gentlemen. I think it was probably more involved in that. But the idea that Bernard Cribbins could have been the Dr. Charlotte, what do you think of this?
I'm not surprised. Like you said, especially in classic era, it felt like, from the stories I've heard from you and a few others, it does seem to be they had such a wide audition process, or they had such a wide sort of reach whenever they were looking for replacements. So it's not a surprise. And to be fair, also, just the comment made me sort of go, yeah, the Doctor isn't a soldier, like the way it seemed to be maybe Bernard was seeing, maybe just off that comment. Especially in classic, I would argue that definitely wasn't really a part of the character at any point. That's more of a modern era thing, I would argue, if anything.
I remember when Pertwee left, and I heard that he was leaving. I was just a kid at the time, and I remember somebody saying to me, maybe Roy Castle can play the Doctor. And you know what? Thinking about it now, he probably would have made a good Doctor, Roy Castle, because he could play the dramatic stuff. He could also play comedy as well. But, Bernard would have made a good Doctor as well, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think Bernard would have made a cracking Doctor, I do have to say. I think he would have been fantastic.
Because he can act. That's the thing. He's multifunction, and he can do loads of different things. So,
I could really see Bernard work well with companions, like with the other actor. That's what I think he would really excel at. Really build a relationship, build a sort of like he does it with even actors he doesn't know. So I think it'd be interesting if he did have that time and that space to really build something, possibly as a Doctor and companion pairing.
But you know what's interesting? Again, it's only just occurring to me. Again, maybe Dan, you know this. I'm trying to think from having looked at all of his credits. I'm trying to think of an example where he was actually a real leading man, a real.
No.
Was he?
He was always supporting. He was always supporting.
I don't think of any.
Colin mentioned the TV movie Dangerous Davies. That was a series of books by the writer Leslie Thomas, and Bernard was the lead in that. The Dangerous Davies was the last detective, and eventually that did get turned into a TV show that ran for 4 or 5 years with Peter Davison in the same role. That original TV movie, I think it was made by Euston Films, somebody like that, Ian, that had worked on Minder and things like that, and he was very much that central character. But I can't think of anything else either, because he was a supporting cast member of the Railway Children. That it was very firmly about the kids, wasn't it? So that doesn't really count.
Yeah, I mean the thing is that he's not leading man material He really isn't. I mean, if you look at him, he's very much the supporting or the person that's integral to the story, whatever. He has that kind of face. He doesn't really have a.
It could be said though, Ian, that's true of a lot of the actors who've played our Doctors, isn't it? That they probably would never have played a Kojak kind of character or a.
I don't know. I think it was the right choice that they went for Tom, because Tom, you can imagine Tom going into an audition and just being Tom. You're like, bloody hell, let's just hire him. You know what I mean?
He would have owned it, wouldn't he?
He would have owned it. Yeah, definitely. Same thing with Matt Smith, in my opinion. You know, when I saw Matt Smith, the first time I saw Matt Smith kiss his knee, I was like, that. I'm sold. This guy's the Doctor. And I think Bernard doesn't have that, does he? He's very much a homely kind of.
We'll find out more about all of this, about not just the Doctor Who story, but all of the parts that he didn't get. I mean, you think about that long list of credits that we were talking about earlier on time. Yeah. In a career that spans all that time, there's bound to be some great parts that he didn't get. And Bernard did write his autobiography just a couple of years ago. And it was called Bernard Who, 75 Years of Doing Just About Everything.
He did.
And not that long ago on social media, his agent was part of a big campaign because Bernard dearly wanted to turn his autobiography into a talking book, and he couldn't get a publisher for it. But through the magic of Twitter, which is Twitter's not a very nice place, we know this, but through Twitter, his manager was able to get some traction on this. And we do have it on his authority that an audiobook was eventually recorded. It's due for release at some point, hopefully next year. We'll be able to hear all of that in Bernard's own voice. Or obviously, you can go and pick up the book. It's available on Amazon and in your local bookstore, I would imagine.
When you think about it, though, he was very, 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 very lucky. And also, his career is amazing. Any actor that's struggling now would want a career like that.
Yeah.
If you think about the people of that time, like, for instance, Richard O'Sullivan. Richard O'Sullivan was like a huge TV star, just like Bernard, right? Yeah. He started a couple just like Bernard, but the way he ended was kind of horrible. But Bernard, he lived to a certain age and started freaking Doctor Who. Do you know what I mean? He went out in a blaze of glory. Yeah. So we should all celebrate that. That man. He didn't get knocked over by a car. He didn't burn. He didn't. You know what I mean? He basically shone brightly. You know what I mean? Yeah.
He lived a long and satisfying and happy life with his wife of all those decades, that career, all those roles across 70-odd years, and now will be fondly remembered and celebrated. There's lots of beautiful fan art out there through social media. You can go and find that.
Great,
there's one in particular that Shooty Gatwa has sort of retweeted and shared to, one by Shay, which quotes that line, "I'll look up to the sky and think of you," which I think is from the end of Partners in Crime. That moment where Donna
sends shivers down me, that artwork. That is just beautiful, the way that's been done.
But he ended up in the TARDIS, didn't he? I mean, he saw Donna fly off at one point, and then in the last episode, he ended up in the TARDIS with the Doctor, so he knows what it's all about now. That's why he was so when the Doctor, obviously, when Donna was getting married, he was so upset that the Doctor was leaving. He was thinking that was the last time he was going to see him. That's why he does that salute to him and all that stuff. So it's a shame he's gone.
Rest in peace, Bernard Cribbins. And
he's in a better place.
I'm sure that he would want us to enjoy that the 60th anniversary material that he's part of, as well as go and rewatch some of these moments of glory, not just from Doctor Who, but from throughout his career. That's the old girl starting up and calling time on this edition of Type 40, a Doctor Who podcast. I'll be back with another soon. Look out for that wherever you found this. It could have been at the dedicated home feed for Type 40, type40.podbean.com. Or maybe we rolled up on Spotify, Audible, TuneIn, Google Play, Apple Podcasts, Podbay, one of those places. We're pretty much everywhere. It could have been here on YouTube, on the Spacebook channel, whatever, and wherever. We're still part of the Fandom Podcast Network's glorious master feed, full of amazing podcasts, terrific conversations, treats for your ears on the daily. Let us know what you think about it all, about Bernard Cribbins. Send us your memories, your favourite moments of his time as Wilf, all those roles, the Jackanories, the Wombles, everything else, the railway children. Why can't I say railway? I'm turning it to Jonathan Ross. Let us know. Get in touch with us through our social media, that's our Instagram and Twitter at Type40 Doctor Who, or you can email us type40doctorwho@gmail.com for that matter. Failing that, just come and tell us in real time by joining us in the Type 40 Facebook group. That's full of generations upon regenerations of fans sharing their memories about classic Doctor Who and those Dalek movies. All that stuff from the new series of Doctor Who that's just wrapped, and we're speculating too about everything that's to come from the 60th anniversary year onwards in all new Doctor Who.
He's in there.
Charlotte, where can people hear more from you? And get in touch with you on social media.
I'm not really on social media, but I am in the Type 40 Facebook group. So now and again, I do sort of comment and pop in. On YouTube, Daniel Leach, I do streams with sort of Daniel. And we did do a Bernard tribute with Wendyology, who you'll know from the podcast.
Oh,
yeah.
And a good friend of Daniel, Scott Vakra. I'd probably murdered that surname. But we did our tribute stream a couple of days ago. So if you want to hear us talk a bit more and some different sort of memories, you can listen to that. And of course, on the podcast and Type 40 Live.
Daniel Leach on YouTube. How about you there, Mr. Mega Geek? What's going on in the Megaverse?
Nothing much. Basically, I try and encourage people to watch. Go to my channel, the Rebecca Gold channel. Obviously, it's a web series. Everybody knows that now. Just trying to encourage people. I'm doing season 2, actually shooting the prologue on Sunday. I'm doing that. And then after that, I'm probably going to be begging for money off people. So just to complete season 2. But, I can still complete without your money. But I'm hoping people will give me some money. But yeah, that's all I'm up to really. But if you get a chance, come to my channel, Rebecca Gold channel, subscribe and like and do all the things that people do on YouTube. Thank you very much.
And how about you, Simon? Where can people hear more from you?
They can find me on Facebook, where I run the Hoonatics Facebook page. And I'm off now to do a bit more renovation on my house going on. And I've got some Doctor Who-y things planned for the renovation. So stay tuned for those.
We shall look forward to
Is your living room going to have a control?
I couldn't tell you.
Get the console. Yeah, that's what I want to see. I want to see the renovation. Like, what's that show they do on the TV that guy goes round?
What is it? I can't remember what it's called. House something? No. I know the one you mean.
Yeah,
I know the one you mean. Yeah.
They take away half the house and sort of rebuild it in an afternoon or something like that. I know that you're not going to do it in an afternoon, but
that's not going to happen.
Yeah, I love watching those shows. And you can find me. I'm on Instagram and Twitter as the Spacebook, where I'm geeking out about not just the Doctor Who universe, the Whoniverse, but everything else that goes on across the genre that we love so much in movies, TV, comics, and all the rest of it. Anything that helps me in my lifelong attempt never to grow up. I think Bernard would appreciate that. I'd like to think that he would, certainly. And thank you to Bernard Cribbins for being himself, for making us laugh and cry and laugh some more. We always have the time if you have the space here at Type 40. We'll speak to you all again soon. Take care. Bye-bye.